Yes, good evening. We have talked about the Reagan administration in the last lecture. I would like to bring your attention to an important element in terms of the Reagan administration. Reagan was obsessed with achieving military superiority, and he thought that the best way to achieve that military superiority is by developing weapons to be placed in space, and that was known as Star Wars. In other words, US satellites will have the capability that are placed in space to knock out incoming missiles if launched by an enemy against the United States. This program has been actually invested in, and many of the universities, including the Defense Department, were doing research on the issue of Star Wars, and they have not achieved a great deal of progress in that direction, despite the fact that much research has been done at universities and in the self-defense department, and it is available. Rather, it is available in those institutions. Then again, I just want to mention in conclusion about the Reagan administration is that he attempted to address the Arab-Israeli conflict and resolve the problem, but it was beyond his capability and his control to achieve an Arab-Israeli conflict, Arab-Israeli peace, and it was left to future administrations. Today, we're going to talk about the Bush administration, and it is President George Bush. We're going to talk about President George Bush, the father, and when he was elected actually in 1991. And I would like, before I start talking to you about the Bush administration in 1991, I would like to give you just tell you a story of that I have personally experienced. I was actually in 1981 a student in George Washington University in Washington D.C. And George Washington University is close to the State Department. It's about 2 blocks. It's close from the Defense Department, which is close by in Foggy Bottom, and close to the Washington National Airport. And then there is the CIA. So in reality, government institutions are located around the George Washington University. It's about also 2 blocks from the White House. When I was doing my master's program, I took a course called National Security. This National Security course was taught by a man called Bob Comer. Bob Comer was in 1976, or between the period of 1976 and 1980, he was part of the Carter administration, and in particular, he was Under Secretary of Defense. So, as people retire from the Defense Department or they lose the elections and the regime or the presidents or the Republican Party or the Democratic Party change, and there are new regimes that come into office, many of these, former officials will end up teaching at the university. So Bob Comer taught me this course called American National Security. And, the course had required a lot of theoretical work, But we read books like George Smoke, Deterrence in American Foreign Policy, Arms Across the Seas, and many other books and literature. In addition to, we have examined the budget of the U.S. Defense Department and how the money is being allocated, where it is being spent, and so forth. As part of his course, and it was required in his syllabus that we needed two simulations. Now we're talking about 1981. So that's a long time ago. But then again, in 1981, one of his simulations was how would the United States respond if Saddam Hussein of Iraq would invade Kuwait and occupy Kuwait? That's one of the scenarios. The second one was what would be the US response if the Panama Canal is closed and taken over by hostile forces, and what would the United States do about it? Since there is a strategic relationship, there's an agreement between the United States and the state of Panama regarding the use of this canal, and one which would be transferred at a later stage would be transferred back to Panama. So we had those two simulations that we needed to address. But then again, this simulation about Iraq occupying Kuwait, we were divided into five different groups, or I assume a few groups, and then some represented the Defense Department, some represented the White House, the Pentagon, the Central Intelligence Agency, Department of DoD, and so forth. And he asked those graduate students, and by the way, those graduate students that were part of that class, usually in the master's program, a lot of students from the different government agencies will come in, take courses, or do a master's or a PhD between the hours of 6 and 9 p.m. This is part of the program they do in George Washington University. So a lot of those people that were there in the class were already high-ranking military officers. They would come with their uniforms and their, so many stars and so forth, with different rankings, and members from the State Department, which is, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or they come from the White House. So you're literally talking about, a good number of members of the U.S. government and it's all of its branches. So we were assigned to take that course and go and do some research and come as groups with an answer how would the United States will respond. I can tell you that the students in their groups came back with papers, plans, rolled papers, plans on how to respond. And the decision was unanimous at that time in 1981 that the United States would introduce troops to the Persian Gulf area and would get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. Now, this is amazing, right? Because when we talk about 1981, and now we are under a new administration in the United States, the George Bush, the father, George Bush, he's become president. And, we remember that George Bush was a former CIA director in the United States. He was the former director. And he came in with a vision. And, as it relates to national security, the international order, peace, and stability of the international system, he had a vision. And the vision was that he needed to strengthen alliances, particularly with NATO, and create some economic growth, prosperity in America, particularly paying special attention to the issue of energy. Energy, this takes us into one direction, takes us out of the Persian Gulf area, because that's most of the oil in the world, the reserves of oil are located into those countries, Iran, and then you're talking about, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Persian Gulf states in general. That's where a good deal of the world reserves are located, and it is out of the Persian Gulf area comes most of the oil of the world that is sent to the United States, to Asia, to India, to China, and those really big consumers of oil. He continued his vision that there has to be a policy of deterrence, deterring others from attacking the United States through the policy of achieving superiority. At least there would be parity, a balance of power, and a balance of terror. And we know what a balance of terror is all about, which is based on the concept of massive assured destruction. If you strike me first, I will strike you back, and we will both pay the price. We both cannot afford to do so. But then again, the surprise came in August 1990. Saddam Hussein, I assume that's the correct month of the year, Saddam Hussein rolled his troops, went to where? To Iraq and occupied Kuwait. He rolled his troops and occupied Kuwait. That by itself, in itself, you know, the world as a whole, the world as a whole could not accept that one state in the Middle East, particularly a state that was not considered a friend of the West, a state that has fought 8 years of war with Iran, and they are accused of using chemical weapons in the war against Iran, in Iran, to have one man control so much of the world's oil. I recall one of the colleagues at Duke University, one of the professors that was there during the invasion, because I was there at the university. He said, we cannot allow one man to control so much of our oil, because this is how the oil comes from. That's the way it is seen. It is very important, very significant. You cannot allow one man. Particularly that this man is seen as enemy of Persian Gulf states, including friends of the United States, including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, and so forth, and Bahrain. How could they allow that to happen? And the Gulf states asked for U.S. help to reverse this, to put an end to the occupation. So you can imagine that, what Undersecretary of Defense in my class, Bob Comer, had as a simulation in 1981 happened in 1990. Already the plans were there. The United States, decided to pull in the reserves, to call the reserves, send troops from every base that the troops were available in the United States, including Dover, including Florida, including all the bases, and in Europe. And within, a few months, they built like 500,000 troops in Saudi Arabia. This is amazing, but you have to really also understand the mentality that exists in the Defense Department, in the White House, in the Pentagon, that there is a strategic interest that exists for the United States in the region, and to achieve peace and to continue maintaining peace in the area. An idea of one country occupying so much of the oil resources of the world is unacceptable. So we had to have the intervention. And interesting enough that, we remember that there were attempts to bring about, reconciliation, to bring about a solution. The Arab states, the Arab League tried to do that. King Hussein of Jordan has tried to do that. Almost every leader in the Arab world that tried to bring about a negotiated solution. And, King Hussein was very right at the time that he preferred to have a negotiated solution, because he was really worried about the consequences of such a war where missiles could be used, particularly when Saddam Hussein was threatening, the state of Israel and allies of the United States and U.S. troops in the region. The issue is that became very complex. We're talking about Iraq, which is not really a superpower. It was a regional power, but then it was faced and had to face the international community, because George Bush brought in a great number of allies to support him, and had the backing and the support of the United Nations to give it legitimacy, and he was present in the region. In a very last attempt, it was negotiated, or in the last attempt to bring about a peaceful negotiation. The Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz was being interviewed, and at the time, I think, by the American Secretary of State, there were negotiations that were held, last-minute negotiations, to bring about a solution, because George Bush wanted unrestricted, unfettered, total, without conditions, Iraqi withdrawal from where? From Iraq, from Kuwait. And Saddam Hussein would not accept. So we're talking about regional power, limited in terms of capability, having to face the United States of America and the international community. I mean, the logic says that there is no balance, despite what we used to hear about the heroism, about Saddam Hussein having nuclear weapons, strategic weapons, and so forth, and all of that. And at the end of the day, was all useless. Iraq was defeated, and the Iraqi army was evicted out of Kuwait. The question is for us as decision makers, as people who have got, minds, young minds, bright minds like yours. You ask the question, when you are part of this international community, how do you go about making decisions? What kind of calculations? Do you live in this world alone? Can you make the decisions that you like, as you like, without taking into consideration the interests of the international community, the superpowers? You take in interest regional powers. How will this affect your decisions? You're not alone in this world. And the consequence of that decision to move into Kuwait was a very costly one because it has led to an occupation, it has led to the presence of American forces into Iraq. Iraq had to pay a very dear price for its decision to go, Saddam Hussein's decision to go into Kuwait. I can tell you that, and you remember this for years to come, when you become a decision maker in a position of authority, whether you are in a foreign ministry or in any institution that represents the people of your country, regardless of where you are, you have to keep in mind that whatever decisions that you have to make sure that those decisions are in the interest of keeping your countries out of harm's way. Because reckless decisions will only result in reckless counter decisions, in a counter attack, so forth. Every decision there is going to be some kind of response toward that particular issue. So the wisdom is how to serve your own country in a way that is reasonable, dignified, without compromising your own national security, while maintaining this vision, this ability to balance between domestic, regional, and international issues. In the case of Iraq, it was a total failure. And Iraq had to pay a very dear price for that war and going into Kuwait. Not only that price was a very dear price they had to pay, it was also a costly price that the American administration had to pay because there were casualties in Iraq. The cost of the war was incredible. It had an impact upon U.S. perception among the people of the region. So there was a negative price that the United States had to pay for introducing troops in the Gulf region. But then again, it was the decision makers and the president's vision and understanding that this would be in the interest of the United States. I just want to tell you another issue to keep in mind. You know, superpowers are superpowers. When we talk about Russia today, it is a superpower. When we talk about China, it is definitely a superpower. If it is not a superpower today, it's on its way of becoming a superpower. If we talk about the United States, it is a superpower. To fly in the United States, to fly from one coast to another, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, it takes you 6 hours by plane to fly between one coast and another. From the north to the south, from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico, it takes you also 5 hours, 5 hours and a half to fly from north to south. So you're talking about a country with incredible resources, and you have to realize that in your foreign policy, in your formulation of your foreign policy, your limitations. What can you achieve? What's realistic to achieve? How can you do it? During the Gulf War, the U.S. administration had to take over the trucks in order to provide the trucks of all truckers, in order to provide quick transportation for the armed forces. They could line up the trucks from one side of the ocean to the other side, and they would never finish. They'll still have more trucks. So we're talking about incredible, incredible resources that were put together to fight against Saddam Hussein. Now, this is a lesson to be learned now. But, then again, he won the war. President Bush won the war, but he realized there was something problematic that exists in our region, the Middle East region, whereby the perception of Americans, in many of the countries of the region, particularly among the people of the region, is that the United States have got a problem, an image problem, is that they are aligned with Israel. They are friends of Israel. The Americans are not paying close attention to the people of the region. This is a perception. And there is a problem with poverty in our region. There is a problem of distribution of wealth. The young people of the region are having a very difficult time. How is it that the U.S. administration can avoid another problem like the one has just been finished during the Gulf War in the Middle East region.